Nature, economics, business, environment, people, health, politics, and spirit. How are they all connected? Can we influence unfolding events on Earth? Broaden your horizon right now. This is Smart Sustainability, the talk with a wholesome perspective to life on planet Earth. Generative dialogue for open minds. Western societies have been founded on Judeo-Christian values, such as inherent worth of the individual, equality before the law, compassion, charity, loving one's neighbor as oneself. The concept goes back to universal human dignity, which is derived from the belief that all people are created in the image of God. The origin of the word dignity, by the way, goes back to self-determination. That's the word, a key concept in the American ideal of freedom, achievement, and the foundation of life that is so beautifully captured, laid out, and anchored in our U.S. Constitution. Now, a moral emphasis on justice, mercy, personal responsibility is found in both the New and the Old Testament, but not only. It is also a key foundation of the human order and belief systems found in more ancient texts and older scrolls, from the Emerald Tablet to the classical Greco-Roman traditions and all across all Enlightenment philosophies. These values have influenced the development of Western institutions today in governance, universities, hospitals, and our systems of law. But with an increased inflow of migrants from around the world, particularly with an Islamic background to Western societies, such as the UK, Germany, and also in the United States, many Western countries got destabilized and are facing a direct clash of values of religious belief systems as an almost daily occurrence. Yesterday's brutal murder of a young Israeli couple in Washington, D.C. right after a religious ceremony by a shooter who yelled, "Free Palestine," directly into the cameras before the murder are another example of a growing imported violence that brought the issue not only on the news media across the country, but also right on our doorstep, here in Washington, D.C. Brutal violence in Western countries committed by people who hate our civilization and way of life, and not only threaten our order and security, our moral values, an open, free, embracing way of life, it threatens our entire Western foundation. So how relevant are Judeo-Christian values today in and to Western societies? Are they worth standing up for? What does it take? How compatible are Western societies with the growing influence of Islam, or better said, Islamism? And where is the line between tolerance and allowing multi-belief systems, which are also a key to Western democracies? Is there an incapability of coexistence after all? Our topic tonight. Thanks for joining us. I'm Nicolette DeVidar. The evolution of Western societies is strongly rooted in Christianity, Judeo-Christian values to be exact. The entire West is forced of having to confront what we believe in and how it clashes with the Islamic thought system. Whether that's a clash of civilization between Islamic and Judeo-Christian, or Islamic and Hindu, or Islamic and Buddhist, because Hindu and Buddhism also face a clash with Islamism. Germany just had a week ago a massive pro-Palestinian protest leading to the mob of Islamic origins dragging a policeman in Berlin through the crowd, dangerously wounding him. A direct assault and hate crime. In the UK, clashes like this have become a regular occurrence, gaining a new dimension with the Southport incidents of the murdering of young girls. And the disproportional treatment of Islamic offenders versus UK citizens that speak out against those crimes. So when convicted pedophiles get their sentences slashed by the same judge that rejects a UK citizen's appeal against a 31-month prison term for a tweet, as was the case with Lucy Connolly, it puts justice and Western law in peril. And unfortunately, Lucy Connolly's story is not the only case. Britain's two-tier justum has become famous in the last year. So what's driving this? Where is the line? Are we called to defend Christian values? And what's the potential future ahead? My guest tonight is Reverend Canon Father Phil Harris. Today he's clerk of the Holy Orders of the Anglican Church in North America and licensed to the Apostolic Anglican Communion as a Global Ecumenical Officer. Voted Briton of the Year for taking a stand against Britain's Prime Minister Starmer for speaking out on Christian values against the Southport crimes. As a result, he got cancelled and literally locked out of his church. A church that grew 350% under his leadership. So please welcome Reverend Canon Father Phil Harris. Great to have you on.
Hi Nicolette, great to be with you this evening. I'm getting used to the 5-hour time difference and I've been drinking my coffee, so we all should be very good.
That is excellent. So diving right in, Father Harris, I talked about the increasing clashes. Actually, we just had today in Germany a case where two kids in Berlin, a 13-year-old Arab migrant stabbed a 12-year-old German classmate with a kitchen knife multiple times at 11:30 a.m. in elementary school. He's on the run now, and hours later, a very similar thing happened in another city in Germany. So obviously, those are not isolated incidences. Where are we going into this? There are many examples of this. Now, you were voted Briton of the Year for speaking out.
Okay, so you've over-egged me a bit. It was the Briton of the Day for speaking out.
That's close.
But I'll take the Briton of the Year, but it was Briton of the Day. Ultimately, it ended up with me being cancelled, and I think a lot of people rallied around, as it were, Nicolette, in support of me speaking out. And unfortunately, too few clergy are prepared to speak out against the problems that we're seeing all across the West. And you mentioned Germany today. Obviously, we had the situation in the US yesterday. But we've been living with this constantly in the UK now for years, I mean, say decades, in fact. And there's things come out in the media, thanks to Elon Musk, who highlighted to the British public things that the establishment had kept quiet. And so we saw transcripts of some horrendous crimes committed against British girls that have gone on now for 20, 30 years. And I think for me as a clergyman, I was like most of the population who thought these things were something of the past. The reality is that it's very much something of the present. And it's getting, in different ways, it's getting worse by the day.
Why do you think your message resonated so much with the British public? What exactly was it in the message that you think really created this huge reaction of videos going viral within a short period of time?
So I have to say, for me, a number of things had happened in late July of last year that brought things to a head. I think the Brits, we're typically a tolerant people. And lots of people have believed the mainstream media and have got on with their lives whilst being quietly concerned. And then we suddenly realised that we had been gaslit by consecutive governments. This isn't just red or blue, this is consecutive governments. And we have this term in the UK now called the uni party, where we have political parties, both sides of the aisle, that are doing the same thing and saying the same thing, just on different levels of anarchy, really, because that's where we're ending up. And it's quite frightening. And I think that we saw the Prime Minister in beginning of August last year tell everybody who was concerned about unfettered illegal immigration, that was concerned about the rise of Islam, and those two go hand in lots of ways. Anybody who was concerned about that, he called them far-right thugs. And so there was a hashtag that was created by an MBE, a member of the British Empire, and by a dame in the House of Lords, and they both spoke out under this hashtag of far-right thugs unite. And the message was very clear, and I thought it would be quite humorous to use the hashtag of far-right thugs unite, because clearly a priest is not a thug, and a priest should always be quite centrist. And so I spoke out against the Prime Minister, and I realised within minutes that there was a massive majority who had been sitting quietly in the background, but actually starting to feel desperate. And you fast forward 9 months now, and it isn't a sense of a small minority feeling desperate. There is a huge majority feeling utterly desperate. The state of the nation, of the governance of the nation, and the crimes that are being committed. And you mentioned knife crimes going on literally in every city, particularly where there's a large immigrant population. And I'm not just saying that there aren't knife crimes, with native Brits, but in terms of percentages, the percentages are just way out of kilter from reality.
Yeah.
And so I spoke out, and it was actually a Saturday, and one of my parishioners had come and spoken to me and said, I'm 79 years of age, and I've just been called a far-right thug because I hold centrist views. And I sat there and I looked at a whole catalogue of things that had happened over a week, and I was just looking at some of my notes here. We had an army officer, a colonel in the British Army, in his greens, stabbed 12 times outside of his own barracks. We had riots in Leeds because, and this was one that really upset me as a priest, we'd had a child removed from their family because of safeguarding issues. So they were concerned about the welfare of this child.
Was that a British child or was that an immigrant child?
It was an immigrant child.
Okay.
And so the child was removed from the family, which started Romanis and Muslims rioting in Leeds. And the riots were horrendous. There were police cars attacked, there were fire engines attacked, there were fires. It was just this whole area in Hare Hills in Leeds that just went nuts. And so what ultimately happened is this vulnerable child was returned to the family from whence they were taken for safeguarding issues because people had rioted. And I just go, either a child is at risk and needs protection, or the child is not at risk. But we can't actually, because people have rioted, put a child back into an unsafe situation, which is what appears to have happened, Nicolette.
Now, Father Harris, there seems to be a lot of push by governments, particularly, I see it a lot in European governments particularly, where everyone is deemed far right that speaks out against the government. And it has been going on for about the last 10 years, I'd say, probably maybe a little longer, but 10, 12 years. The BBC had an interview in Beyond Belief where you were the main discussion, but you were not part of the discussion, as I noticed. And they had talked about you and also called you, and as many others actually, who have the Christian faith and speak out, as if they were hijacking the Christian belief basically to move people and manipulate people to move to the far right. What are you saying to those?
So you noticed that as well, that the whole context was to actually label me as far right.
That could not be overheard.
It was like, it's almost like and in fact this comment was made to a lawyer that was actually on that particular show, a lady called Andrea Williams, who is a fabulous advocate for free speech, and she runs the Christian Legal Centre and Christian Concern in the UK. And she spoke to me afterwards, and it's like the comment was made to her, we're on two separate tracks. And so it's okay to be anything other than Christian. It is okay to have anything but Judeo-Christian values. And the church has got to a point where it's stopped preaching the good news of Jesus, which is what the church is there for, right? That we believe that we have the hope for the nations in Jesus Christ, who said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And these people are advocating for anything but that message. And if you declare that message, all of a sudden you are a nationalist, or you are a far-right Christian that's a radical, and you need to be pulled down.
But do you think this is part of this particular message that you just mentioned, that sees Jesus as the way of light, basically the main guiding post of the way of light? Or do you think that it's an attack against Christianity as a whole, and the Christian belief has been turned into a far-right movement?
So the book of Ecclesiastes tells us that God has placed eternity in our hearts. There is something that's inherent in all of us that's a God-shaped whole. And so in the West, our values were founded on Judeo-Christian values, as you said at the top of the show. And if you look at the Pilgrim Fathers with the United States, everything was inherently Christian. And, you know, that statement of Jesus, where he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, is very clear. And it is what the West is founded on. So we're in the year 2025. 2025 years from what? 2025 years from the birth of Christ. And Jesus literally changed the world, and Christendom spread over the world, and that was the values, and that is the values that we're based on. The Ten Commandments are the touch point of all of our laws, and when we step away from them, we get into trouble. Unfortunately, we saw in America and in the UK, God excluded from schools. We saw people attempting to make their own way in life. And what ultimately happens is, if you remove God and something greater than yourself out of the story, what actually fills it is self. And so we've seen over a period of time that faith has been removed by me. It's an iPhone, it's like iMac, iPad, me. And so in the UK and also in the US as well, instead of community being about the we, it's about the me. And so there's the old adage, isn't there, that it takes a family to give birth to a child, but it takes a village to raise a child. And so what we've lost now is we've lost those family values, but more so I would suggest here in the UK than you have in the States. But we've lost those family values. We destroy family, we destroy community, you destroy society, you destroy your nation.
I got to go back, though, to one earlier point that you just made, because I think there's a difference between Jesus as a person and Christ consciousness and God as a faith perspective. So when you look at the evolution of faith, one can say there are some people who see Jesus as the person who is the leader to the way, and then there are others that see Jesus as showing us the way and a part of that, but there's still something greater, which is the God concept overall. I need you to clear that for us, because I hear from what you say, you said that the Western world is mostly founded in Jesus Christ. I will challenge that, though, because I don't think that's entirely correct that way.
Okay, so let me go back to the point that I made of 2025 what? Yeah, so 2025 years since the birth of Christ. Now, from Jesus Christ is a Jew. And so through Jesus comes the Ten Commandments, comes the laws that our nations are actually built on in the West. So we have a Latin church, the Latin-speaking church, the Roman church, and then we have the Orthodox church, the Greek-speaking Catholics of the East. Now, we might have ended up with, and I have this conversation lots of, people who are cultural Christians who like the values but don't necessarily own Jesus. The point that I would make is it was Jesus himself that says, I am the way. This is the way that you live. I'm fulfillment of the law that's been given to the nation of Israel, and this is how you do life and this is how you live. So does that clarify your point, Nicolette?
No, not really. I hear what you're saying, but it doesn't prove a point, because one could also argue that the I am is representative of something greater. So when you look at spiritual evolution, I don't think Jesus ever meant to make it only portraying to himself as a person versus showing the way of what a monotheistic God is all about and faith is all about.
So Jesus said...
Because you're taking the Bible literally, and there are also schools of thought and also mystery schools where there's an inner circle and an inner understanding of the Bible and the mass understanding of the Bible. The mass understanding of the Bible always saw Jesus as the one person that is there. But in the inner understanding of the Bible, you actually see that there is more inner movement within the soul, more aspects of telling us that Jesus shows us what it's like to aspire to get closer to God and unite with God.
So I'm a priest, which means I take the Bible very literally. So if we actually look in terms of what Jesus says, he says, I am the Father of one, and no man goes to the Father except through me. You can't be any more clearer than that in terms of the Christian message of what Jesus says. I am the way to the Father. And all the way through the epistles, we actually see the message is very clear. If you believe in your heart and you confess with your mouth, Paul tells the Romans, that Jesus is Lord, you will be saved. And so it's that context as a Christian that Jesus points to the Father. He says that I've not come to destroy the Torah, the law, I've come to fulfill it. And so life is known in me. And so that very much the United States and the United Kingdom has been, since Augustine, Constantine particularly, have looked to the Christian ethos and the Christian way and those words of Jesus that says, I am the way, the truth and the life. Now, if we go back to what I said in August, what the Prime Minister had done was he divided the nation. And he had divided the nation by his rhetoric of calling people like me far right for holding Christian values. And my point was that a wise man said that a house divided against itself cannot stand. And I unpacked some uncomfortable thoughts and some uncomfortable facts that have since been proven to be true. And then I ended that video, which ended up with 5 million views across various platforms, by saying that wise man was no other than Jesus Christ, the Son of the living God. And so that was the point where now actually, Sakir, you're faced with standing in the face of the Christian God. And our nation in the UK is different to other nations in the sense that we have two lawmaking bodies in our nation, the Synod of the Church of England and the Houses of Parliament. And the Supreme Governor of the Church of England is the monarch, it's King Charles III, and the head of Parliament is King Charles III. And so we cannot be anything other than a Christian country because the monarch is charged with being defender of the faith. However, we have had now successive governments who have allowed other religions to have a significant foothold. And so we're now ending up with the Adhan, for instance, being prayed in the Houses of Parliament. And you're going, how does this work? Because you have a religion that is completely at odds with the Judeo-Christian values that this nation is founded on. And we actually have the Houses of Parliament that are built on a church where another religion is being prayed to a different God. And so we have these conflicts that are just, it's dark and light, it is complete opposites of faith that are not compatible at all with each other. And so that's caused a great deal of the conflict, because once Islam gets a foothold, Islam means subjugation.
Okay, hang on a second, so that we don't get ahead of ourselves here.
Okay, sorry, yeah, pull me back in, sorry.
Yeah, just to clarify one thing. So are you actually advocating overall that there should only be Christian faith in the UK, or are you saying there is tolerance for other faiths, but
absolutely tolerance,
in moderation?
Absolutely tolerance. And I'm glad you actually raised that point, Nicolette, because that's a real kind of very important point to make.
Yeah.
So one of the things about our nation and about the values in the nation and about the values of Christianity is the freedom of other religions.
Exactly. I was going to get to that.
So I want to highlight that.
Yeah.
The point that I'm making is the nation religion of the nation is Christianity. Now, I cannot go to a Muslim country and be a Christian priest as I am, for instance, in the United States or I am in the United Kingdom, because there are restrictions on me. I cannot go to the Houses of Parliament or the equivalent of whatever their government is and actually start advocating for Christianity because they are a Muslim country. Now, we have freedom of religion in the UK, and I would advocate for that, but we're now in a situation where we don't have blasphemy laws in the United Kingdom. But what's happening because of Sharia law is they're wanting to introduce blasphemy laws in the term of Islamophobia. So we've got all of these tensions that are going on within our nation.
And that is a direct result from having masses of immigrants that basically have taken over most of the, or that are taking over dominance basically over most of the cultural foundations of the country. Now, when you look back, Father Phyllis, religious wars are nothing new for the UK.
Yep.
Is this a repetition of a religious war?
Okay, that is a very cleverly worded question. I've got to be careful how I answer this one. I think if we're not careful, it can become a religious war. I think there's things that have just become apparent in the last few days, like the plan in France for France to become a caliphate, and that's just cropped up in the news in the news cycle in the last couple of days. What we have in the UK is we're on a knife edge, and what people have seen is their Christian values eroded, and they want their Christian values. The tension that we have is we have lots of churches empty. And my point is, if you want Christian values and you don't want those churches to become mosques, like a lot of them have, go to church, be Christian, do Christian things. However, we are on a knife edge because we've had this appeasement of, for instance, the rape gangs that have been going on, the Pakistani rape gangs.
Yeah, you need to fill in the US audience on this, because we do not get enough news on that. So give us a little bit of background context on exactly that issue.
So we knew there was a problem in towns in the north of England, large towns, conurbations, where there were girls that had been raped 12 years of age, younger sometimes, by predominantly Pakistani rape gangs. And we knew that had happened a number of years ago. What has now come out is there's a pandemic all over the nation with predominantly Pakistani rape gangs, where there has been the most horrendous things done to, and the figures are looking like now something like 1 million young girls and women. And in the name of diversity and immigration and multiculturalism, a blind eye has been turned by the establishment, by the judiciary, by police forces, by carers. We've even had a story that has come out where a girl was raped, a young girl was raped. She became pregnant, and the care worker went to the wedding to the Muslim man that had raped her. It is horrendous.
That is horrendous, yeah.
You cannot get your head round the things that have actually been going on. And what Elon Musk did was he put into the public domain the court documents of what had happened to these girls. And it's horrendous. And we have called for a national inquiry, and the government does not want to undertake a national inquiry because it seems that there are a number of senior figures who are complicit in either turning a blind eye or actually involved in some horrendous way.
So it is a systemic issue.
We have a systemic issue.
Yeah.
It is horrendous, and I find it very difficult to talk about, because as a priest, I wasn't aware that I knew things had happened in the past. The fact that this is still going on and the fact that authorities are turning a blind eye is just absolutely, utterly abhorrent. And we have now a number of women who are victims of these rape gangs that are now in their 20s and 30s who are speaking out. There is a movement, and the government is not wanting to invest anything into a national inquiry. And that's incredibly concerning, and it's making people very angry that there is some cover-up that's going on, and there's no question at all.
Do you think this is the government doesn't do anything about this because they feel guilty and they feel that there is a part of irresponsibility that they don't want to own up to? Or do you think there is more to it and this is really to deliberately destabilize the West? And since Britain is an island, you guys have nowhere to go. You're no longer part of the EU. You can't come over here. You're stuck on your island.
Till yesterday, when Keir Starmer actually signed an agreement for movement of people with Europe against the wishes of the people of the nation, but that's another story, maybe for another day. I've got to be really call it as it is, because that's what I'm known for now.
Yeah.
There has been a plan to destabilise the nation that's a long-term plan. It's a global plan. It's a European plan to destabilise the West. There's no question at all about that. There is therefore then, is there any remorse? I don't think there's any remorse, because there's two things that have happened. There are certain political parties that are relying on, for instance, the Muslim vote. And so they don't want to investigate the Pakistani rape gangs because they are Muslim rape gangs, and that will cost votes. So this is about, on one hand, power. The next part is there are people within political parties that are certainly complicit, but you've got the migration issue that was an idea to destabilise that's gone wrong, but the consequences of it going wrong now are so drastic it's very hard to walk back from without very key figures ending up in prison.
Yes, and I think that's why they all shy away from that. But I want to address two more issues, Father Harris. One is, so you were cancelled by the British Anglican Church, but you were taken in, as I understand it, by the North American Anglican Church. Okay, is that correct?
So I was in the Church of England. I saw the trajectory of the state church, and I had been working in a wider context in the church, and so I moved my license to the US, and so I've been canonically resident in the US since 2012. In recent times, I moved into the Anglican Church in North America to work in the UK amongst the churches. There's lots of churches and clergy that are very disgruntled in the UK with the Church of England because of their woke ideologies, their altars that actually have gay pride flags on them instead of actually being adorned and dressed properly. Yeah. All kinds of wokerartery that's going on in the church. And there's lots of the nation that are unhappy about that, but there's lots of clergy. So I was received into the Anglican Church in North America and licensed back to my role so I could actually work in these contexts. And I'm really grateful for the Anglican Church in North America and what we stand for, but it actually means that my orders are valid in the UK, but the bishops have no control and no authority over me because I answer to American bishops.
So why did the Americans take you in? Did they like what you were saying?
It would appear that way, yes. Look, I'm a Christian that declares Jesus, as you've already discovered. Yeah. I declare the truth of Christianity, that is the answer to all ills. God has placed eternity in the hearts of men, as I said earlier. Yeah. The bit is that, so when my video went viral, and can I share the story with you?
Yeah,
just very briefly?
But make it quick, because I have one big point that I still want to tackle.
Okay, so lots of things happened, and we had a migrant kill 3 girls in Southport and maim 10 others. And that was the tipping point, really, for me, where this had to stop. And other things happened, like a postman pushed onto rail tracks by an immigrant, knife murders out of control, 8 men charged with gang raping a British girl, and the crimes could not be cited because they were that horrendous. So we'd had all of this gone on, and so you speak out into that kind of context. And I made the video. It's a Saturday afternoon, I have Sunday services, and so I put the video out at lunchtime. I turned my phone on to Do Not Disturb. I wrote my sermon, I got ready for Sunday. I went home and I turned my phone on, and my phone was blowing up. Literally, there was about 800,000 shares of my video at that point. And so I called Bishop Bill in the US, my bishop, and I said, Bishop, I might have created you a world of trouble. And he said, what have you done? And I said, look, I've impeccably represented an Anglican order in the UK for 8 years, and I made a video that was 8 minutes long, and I need to send it to you. And he said, you better send it to me. So I sent it over to Bishop Bill, and 10 minutes later, Bishop Bill calls me back and he said, good job, Canon. I'll let the Archbishop know, crack on. And so incredibly supportive. And the other Archbishop that I worked for, I sent him the same message, but I actually ahead of that said to him, Bishop Bill says it's okay, but he watched it and he went, no, we've got to support you in this. And so I'm grateful to Orthodox bishops in the US that have supported me and stood by me and continue to stand by me in my cancellation. It took 2 days for the Archbishop of Canterbury and others to remove me from certain roles that I do hold in the nation. Yeah.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about Islam. Or actually, I think Islam has evolved into something else, which I call Islamism, which I think is quite different actually from the actual religion. Because we're in the West because we're founded on the values of tolerance and practicing your free religion, etc. Most of the countries feel that we give space to other belief systems, etc. But I do think at this point we have to ask ourselves, is Islam actually really a religion, or has it morphed into a political ideology, or even more a political system? What's your take on that?
Okay, I don't think it's morphed. I think it always has been since the 7th century, a political system. And I mentioned Islam means subjugation and submission. And that's what Islam has done around the world. It sets up Sharia law and it subjugates people and it brings people into submission. Now, you can have nice people who are Muslims. However, the religion actually requires non-Muslims to pay jizya, and we now have this situation where we have got this whole part of hijrah, which is this kind of emigration to go and take over countries. It is a political system wrapped up in the kernel of a religion. And bear in mind that it was only when Muhammad became a warlord that Islam started spreading around the world. And that's a historic fact.
And part of, I believe, why they still think that they should be, so to speak, the new world order is mostly because they consider Muhammad was the last prophet, and therefore that gives them the right to claim dominion over everybody else, all the older religions and all the previous religions and all the previous monotheistic belief systems. That's why they also have the audacity to come into Western countries and put Sharia law out there and say this is the new law, which de facto it is not.
Exactly that. And that once Sharia law takes foothold, you're done for as a nation. And that's what we're fighting against at the moment. We've got, 60, it's roughly that figure, that all of a sudden Sharia courts popped up. As soon as you get Sharia courts, you're in trouble, because Sharia law is completely at odds with the West and freedom of speech and freedom of religion, because Sharia law does not allow that. Now go back to Muhammad, and we talk about Muhammad as a prophet. Muhammad was saying, look, wait till the Jews turn up, they'll affirm that I'm a prophet. And the Jews turned up and they went, you're a false prophet. And so he starts killing them. And that started off that conflict. All of a sudden, Muhammad becomes this warlord. And so we've got this system that is this system of submission that takes a foothold, and you cannot get rid of it when it does. And if you look at the freedoms of, for instance, in Lebanon, and this wonderful place in the East that was inherently Christian, and you see how women were dressed, and and they welcomed openly Islam in, and you look at it now, and you look at what's happening in Iran. It is, and now in Iraq, where we've got women or girls that have been married that are not even 10 years of age, that are being married in Iraq, and you're just going, this is horrendous, but it's what happens when Islam takes a foothold.
I think I would call it Islamism. That's what happens, because that's the political ideology. But I think if you really look, they're as hard to even their own people that violate that order. The main difference, I believe, is that in Islam or Islamism, the dogma, you do not have a personalized centric experience with God, but it's rather this ideological compound that basically covers up the masses and the individual, like what communists did in communism was the same thing, or what sects do to their members. So the individual counts nothing, and whatever the dominating dogmatic rules are, they count for everything. And when you look at in Islam, when you look at what they do to Sufis, for example, which is a sub-Islamic religion that has, in contrary to the regular Islamic dogma, Sufism has more of a personalized, God-centric experience, direct experience with God, and there are even some Sufis that actually represent Christ consciousness in the sense that this is a connection to God. They get haunted down and killed, and very often murdered. And if you have other Muslims that go against the radical Islamicist traditions, they become open game for all the others to be hunted and killed. So clearly values for us, for Christian values, love, mercy, forgiveness, which are in all monotheistic religions, real religions, a key pillar, from Hinduism to Buddhism to everywhere else, is non-existent in Islam.
Quite correct, and they will kill each other. But there is one point, and they do, Muslims do. Muslims kill, I mean, in Nigeria, we've had 60,000 Christians killed. And I go and minister in Nigeria. And so it's, and in fact, the last trip coming back, someone actually prayed for me when I got back, and they said, as they prayed for me, thank you that Father Phil wasn't kidnapped. And I never thought about that when I went, but actually that's a reality. Here's the problem with Islam, though. I hear what you're saying in terms of Islamism, in terms of the dogma and the radical. But if an imam in a mosque actually has somebody who is going to commit a terror act, he will not notify the authorities because he's not permitted to. That's the danger of Islam.
Yeah.
That they cannot talk about each other. And yes, you're quite correct in going Islamism, which is radical, but even moderate Muslims will not actually dob in, tell on. If there's something a fellow brother is going to do, they will not actually alert the authorities, you know, because they're not permitted to do that. And that's the danger. And of course, you've got this other thing, which is taqiyya. And so Muslims are allowed to actually lie to you and me for their own gain. They can't lie to each other, but if you're a non-Muslim, they are permitted to lie to you for your own gain. And it's really difficult for me as a Christian, where I am commanded to love my neighbour.
Yes.
And I have lots of Muslim friends, but you deep down know that you can't trust them, because ultimately what they're saying to you, is that really truth? When they say you can trust me, can you? When they say they go, and that's a real tension of how do you balance life in such a conflicting scenario. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. Shouldn't we then stop treating Islam as a religion and start treating it for what it actually behaves like, a sect or a political ideology?
Yes, and the political, absolutely. And the political ideology is you get key people in key positions, in a nation. So we have a organisation called Ofsted here, which are the governing body for schools to make sure that education is at the right standards. Now, if there are children that are being abused, let me just give you a scenario here. If there are children that are being abused, then ultimately Ofsted get involved. The head of Ofsted now has just been appointed, who is a Muslim. We've got Muslim mayors all over the country, and they get into key positions. And so London now is unrecognisable from 10 years ago because we have a Muslim mayor and we have a massive influx of immigrants, of migrants in the capital. And so it bears no resemblance to the London that I trained in 40 years ago, 35 years ago.
Yeah, because if you really think about this, if we start treating it as a political system and we stop treating it as a religion, so to speak, and you look at how in many Western governments, for example, political parties are treated when they have a different view or more radical positions. In Germany, Germany is talking now about banning one of the new parties, the far-right party, AfD, which really isn't far-right, but so on. But those we consider banning parties, but we're not banning something that calls itself a religion. And I think the big shift that we all need to make is maybe start talking about this more as a political ideology or sect versus an actual religion, and put it in the same category as all the other monotheistic religions. Because Islam does this to every other religion too.
Look, I couldn't agree more. So we're in. This is the bit that got me cancelled and lost me my church. Yeah. Was I actually said this, and I think ultimately what we're seeing is, if I show you a picture now of the Home Office, the British Home Office, it's very hard to actually see a Anglo-Saxon in the photograph. Now I don't care about the colour of people's skin. I care about how people behave. Mm-hmm. But when you've got lots of people in the photograph wearing a hijab, for instance, you have an indication that they are not Christian. And I believe that the actions that were taken about me that cost me my church were because I'd spoken out. In fact, I know because I'd spoken out against Islam and against exactly what you've just said.
Yeah. So what do you think needs to happen? And speaking of your church, I know you are in process of building your own church, so to speak. Tell us about that.
Oh, yeah, On the 3rd of March, the trustees of the building, which was my church, St. James, because of me being outspoken and the fact that the Charity Commission, which is the body that oversees churches in the UK and other charities, wrote to them about my, inverted commas, divisive comments, they not only summarily dismissed me and my deacon, but I discovered the following day had locked me out of the church, where all my ministerial recruitments, my robes, my library, etc.
So physically, we're talking of physically locked you out.
I was locked out. In fact, actually, I've been getting some of my items back today. Someone had to come and open up because they changed the locks. Yeah. And so I was locked out the building. And so we are meeting currently in a pub. Yeah, in a sports and social club, when we're doing church and celebrating Mass in the pub, Eucharist in the pub. And all of my church, apart from the trustees, came with me. They were all shocked, and so the whole church is with me, but we don't have a building. And so we're now currently procuring a building that's an existing church. It was built in 1828. It's a wonderful building, and is along the same road. It's about 1.5 miles from the previous church. And so we need to acquire the funds to buy that building, and there is a bit of urgency around that. And there's 2 reasons. It's one, we need to save this building that's empty. Mm-hmm. And as I say, it's a historic building, 1828, beautiful building. I think you might have seen the pictures actually, Nicolette. Yeah. And so we need to actually raise the funds to buy that building urgently. If we don't, there's 2 things that are going to happen. It will probably be used for a different type of worship, and I think you know what I'm saying because we've been talking about that for the last 40 minutes. Yeah. So we need to save it so it doesn't become a mosque, one. But secondly, there's this most amazing stained glass window in the building, and that will just be lost. And so I need a church and a pulpit that I can preach from. My bishops in the US are supporting us, and we have a fundraiser out there to raise £250,000 to procure the building. And the funds have started to come in, but we really need people to help us actually raise these funds over the next 5 or 6 weeks.
So, Father Harris, since you're building your new church, what's the name of your new church?
The name of the new church is St Jude and St James. St Jude is the patron saint of lost causes, and St James is the patron saint of pilgrims. So we have this new church and a building that we're looking to move into. And we can, if you look at St Jude and St James .church, you can find us there.
So are most of your parish members, I mean, you had, obviously, when you were still running your church, you had like a growth of 350%. Do you think that a lot of the church members, are they following you? Are they following you right now to the pub?
They absolutely are. And in fact, we're growing even more. We were almost at capacity in the pub last Sunday, which was the 5th Sunday of Easter. So I've just recorded a video for this Sunday, the 6th Sunday of Easter. They absolutely are with me, and so many others have come as well. And so we're looking at how we can get into this building and procure this building.
Is it difficult in England to basically become an independent church?
Here's the good thing, I'm not, because I'm part of the Anglican Church in North America. Okay. We have freedom of religion, and I am an Anglican church, an Anglo-Catholic church, but part of the Anglican Church in North America, and so it's no issue at all to do that, and those bishops are supporting me.
So you're building an independent church which is affiliated with the North American Anglican Church?
Absolutely that.
Okay. Now, coming back to the beginning of our topic, when you looked at, we talked a little bit about the foundation of Western societies in Christian values, etc. Is the conclusion to all of this that perhaps Islam is incompatible with Western culture?
Yes. There's just, Charlie Kirk has actually he's over here at the UK at the moment, and he's just been speaking about that. It's just on one word alone, freedom, Islam is incompatible. And you can then talk around, we've talked around kind of Muhammad saying he's the final prophet. And here's an interesting one. Islam teaches that Jesus Christ is a prophet. So we have a bit of a problem here, because Muhammad initially tried to point to Jesus and said, look, I'm the final prophet. But if Jesus is a prophet and Jesus declares that he's the way to God, then either Jesus or Muhammad is the false prophet. You can't have it both ways. And so you've got this complete incompatibility of Islam with Christianity and with the Western way of life founded on Christianity.
Thank you so much. Very clear words. Reverend Canon Father Phil Harris, thanks so much for staying up late, actually, right now in England. And thank you for all the input on that. Thank you so much to our viewers for watching. I know this is quite a challenging topic, because on the one hand, we in Christian Judean belief systems, we do believe in freedom of religion. We believe in freedom. But as Father Harris said, freedom is really the key word in all of this. And somehow there's got to be a line where maybe we don't want to stretch our tolerance too far, and it is worth standing up for our own values. Thank you so much for watching. This was Smart Sustainability, and have a good night, and we'll see you next week.